here from Sydney University Postgrad Representative Association, and we've called this action, we've initiated this action today against the government's budget attacks on young people, on students, the proposed fee hikes, the proposed attempt to get us to pay back the HECS debt at $42,000 a year, which is just above minimum wage. Shame. Shame. We are here to unequivocally say, young people say no. This is Marley from ANU.
Hey guys, I'm Vanna Marley, I'm from ANU. I've called action with Rachel today.
And we are also very grateful to have the support of the National Tertiary Education Union, National Union of Students, and a whole bunch of student associations and groups from across the country who are saying very loudly, we do not want this further enslavement of young people. The attacks come on the back, of course, of the penalty rates, which are measures which are going to further impoverish young people, and they come on the back of housing prices rising to extraordinary lengths, and also rental prices rising to extraordinary lengths. So it's no surprise that young people, when they're polled and when they're surveyed, indicate high levels of anxiety because the future is very bleak. But we are here today to say the future is resistance, and we will rise to the challenge, and we will stop you like we stopped fee deregulation in 2014. We will not allow this to go down. There's a young activist who's going to speak. There's a bunch of speakers here today. Young activist called Amy Wilson, who was involved a lot in the Sydney College of the Arts battle to save her arts college at Sydney University. But also I do want to acknowledge Matilda, who gave a fantastic acknowledgement of country for the union speech here today, and that we are standing on Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. But let's hear from Amy, who will give you an indication of what young people think of these proposed attacks. Amy.
Hi, before I begin, I'd also like to acknowledge that we're standing on stolen land. Sovereignty was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So as a bit of a context, I'm from Sydney College of the Arts Resistance, and we held the longest student occupation in the history of New South Wales and went for 65 days. We had a dance party in the Dean's basement, and I had a nap in his office. It was a good time. So through student-led activism at my art school, we stopped a merger with the COFA, College of Fine Arts, so we actually still have an art school, which is pretty sweet because I'd like to complete my education. We reduced staff cuts that were proposed at 60% initially to 40%, and we've kept our majors intact because originally they're still trying to get rid of our degree, but originally we weren't even going to have majors, which is a bit unfortunate when you can't sign up for a specialised education. And we ensured that we have continued access to our specialised campus at Callan Park until the end of this year. Most importantly, and what I would like to focus on, is that we built a community, and through that community I'm here today. I met students that I hadn't met before at art school, and I learned about the MUA because they would hold barbecues for us, and all sorts of amazing things arose out of our fight to save our art school. And we're continuing to fight against the systematic disrespect towards higher education. It's a hard fight, I'm not going to lie, but I believe it's a fight that we can win. And I believe that higher education matters and it should be accessible to everyone, regardless of how much money their parents have. And I believe that not only can we keep higher education accessible for ourselves, we can keep it accessible for future generations, so my nieces and nephews don't have to be millionaires in order to get a degree if they want it. And I believe that ultimately we can create free education in Australia. Everyone deserves a chance to be educated. It's a right, not a privilege. We deserve to be educated and build better lives for ourselves. And that's why I'm disgusted with this budget, because yet again, a bunch of men that got a completely free education are trying to rob me of the chance to do my masters. But they're not going to win, and we're going to continue to fight by building communities with unions, students, and Indigenous people. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. And of course, Amy goes to Sydney University, and you would have seen Sydney University's Vice-Chancellor Spence in the news. Vice-Chancellor Spence, who led the attack against the Arts College, is the richest Vice-Chancellor in the country on $1.3 million. And is chauffeur driven to and from work, and he's possibly the richest Vice-Chancellor in the world. We'll get back to you on that. So yes, but taxing the rich to enable free education, that is something that we are also campaigning and fighting for. Thanks for reminding us that of that, Amy. Now we're going to hear from Che Baines, who's from Quebec, is a TAFE student and has been involved in the fight against fees in Quebec. Welcome, Che.
Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that, again, we are standing on stolen land, and that this is the land of the Indigenous people. They were the original caretakers of the land, and they always were and always will be. So yes, my name is Che Baines, and I'm a current TAFE student at Ultimo TAFE in Sydney in the Youth Work Certificate. And I'm a former university student of universities in Montreal, Quebec. And I was a member of the SAA campaign and of the student occupation that Amy mentioned. So in Quebec, students have always fought against the types of actions that Turnbull and his Liberals are proposing today. In 2012, when we were faced with a fee hike of tuition fees from $2,168 to $3,793, Quebecois students across the province went out on a seven-month strike. This was a full academic strike. There were no classes, no assignments. We were out on the street all day, every day, fighting for our right to an education. And we defeated the hikes. They were actually lowered to $1,000 lower than our original student fees. And we managed to organize enough after our 7th-month strike, while we were scrambling to get back to class, to organize the people of Quebec to fight against Jean Charest's government and get them out, so that this, well, our hope was that it would never happen again, but as we all know, the fight is never ending, apparently. And then in 2015 in Quebec, we had a government under Philippe Couillard, who is a devil, I swear, who introduced an austerity budget that would attack education, social services, and access to abortion for the women of Quebec. And it would also attack housing and welfare rates. So again, we called a strike. We were out for 3 months of full academic strike, and we reversed some of that austerity budget, and Quebecois students are still fighting that. So I have seen firsthand the kind of power that students can have when they organize and when their student unions are fully behind them and exercise all of the great power that they have. And I fully believe that the only way to defeat this budget that is being talked about right now, right over there, is to get the students of Australia out of their classrooms and onto the streets. Yeah! We cannot just stand by, or I suppose sit by in our chairs and behind desks while they bring through this kind of thing, and while the Labour Party lets that happen. We are the people who have the power. Already, there has been around $3.9 billion has been taken from higher education since 2011, and they want to take a further $2.8 billion. That cannot happen. Students are facing the reality already that paying for their education will mean not having money for food or housing. That is not right. And that's going to continue to happen because students are going to have to pay back their student loans earlier and when they have less money, which means that students as a population will become poorer and poorer, where the people who run our universities and the people who bring in these changes are getting richer and richer. our education will also be getting more and more neoliberal, more like a business degree across the board, and it will be less and less quality as they fire our teachers. So I want to reiterate that young people, we are under attack, and us and our allies, we need to get out on the street and we need to fight back.
Thank you, Che. What a victory it was in Quebec. That we will learn the lessons and we will enact. Now we've got Marley, who's going to introduce another raft of speakers. So welcome Marley from Australian National University.
I'm a low SES student from a regional area at the ANU. I can't stress enough how hard it was to just get to university, let alone have to face the onslaught of cuts and fee hikes. So I'm going to introduce the education officer at the ANU, Robin Lewis, who will speak on the cuts.
Before I start, I just want to acknowledge also that we're on Ngunnawal land today and that their sovereignty was never ceded. So we're here today because the government once again is trying to attack education and young people. The Turnbull-Abbott government has shown us since 2013 that they don't care about young people, they don't care about education, they don't care about research, and they don't care about anyone who can't afford to pay US-style fees for a degree. Shame! In tonight's budget, we are going to see students paying more and more for their education and receiving less and less from it. As fees are set to increase and the HECS repayment threshold is set to lower, students will be paying more and more for their degrees. At the same time, the teaching budget for universities is being cut, meaning that our courses are already being cut at almost every university around the campus, and we can expect this to continue with the changes under the new budget. Students won't stand for this, and we need to show the Minister, Simon Birmingham, and this government that we fought fee deregulation in 2014 and we won. Student power is strong and students will fight again to ensure that no more cuts are made to our education, and that we need and want and will continue to fight until we have a government that values young people, that values education, and that values our universities. At ANU, there is a lot of student anger about these cuts. Every time you walk around the campus in the last week, you hear people who are talking about them and who are unhappy about this. As they should be. Everyone should be unhappy about these cuts. The only people that benefit are the government and the rich, who are getting tax cuts and more tax cuts, whereas everyone else is having to pay more and more so that they can live in luxury. Shame! So students today are fighting back, and will be fighting back on May the 17th as well at the National Day of Action next week. If you're in Canberra, that will be at ANU in Union Court, and I hope you come along.
Thanks, Robin. Our next speaker is from the NTEU, so the National President, Jeannie.
Thanks, Marley. So, we were lucky enough to get the pre-budget announcement of our cuts. Obviously, they thought they were going to go down real bad, and they did, and they will continue. By announcing a week earlier doesn't mean it's off the radar. And I know that from everybody I've been talking to, including Up With That mob. That's a big issue. Students paying more for higher education. In a country where we already pay far too much. So, what, 7.5% hike on HECS, 2.8% cut in teaching budget to universities. When we are in the OECD, the wealthy countries, we have the second lowest public investment in higher education, while we already pay the 5th highest fees. So while the rest of the world, like the comrades in Quebec, are mobilising and acting and debating in their parliaments even, in Europe, in North America, in South America, in Asia, the debate about university fees is one about lowering them or abolishing them. In this country, people are still talking about making them more. We've got to change that. And what we're finding is as poll after poll is done, and I'm not a great fan of polls, but I don't mind citing them when they suit like everybody else. But what we're finding is more and more people are saying, why is anyone paying to go to university? Why? Because everybody benefits from an educated population. Clearly you need to get qualifications to get a heap of jobs. But what we also know is that more and more jobs will require that, or else you won't even get one. But also, the better educated we are, the more better quality research we do, the more inquiries and thinking we do into knowledge, the better a society are. Sure, we're economically more prosperous, but what we also are is healthier, happier and more civil. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So the government's cuts to HECS will do nothing for universities. It's not about putting money into universities, it's actually about paying off the HECS debt. They're worried about the HECS debt. It's blown out because of other dodgy activities like the TAFE Shonk episodes with private companies just running off with government money and then putting lots of people in heaps of debt. No, it's about, so they need to contain that debt. The best way of containing the government's HECS debt is to not charge fees. Then you won't have one. And then they can work out how to wear it down. They've got a whole heap of people at the moment who, of course, were ripped off by those vet shonks, and we should be arguing all those debts should just be wiped off, for starters. So we need to go on the attack. So what does it mean? The students are paying more, but they're getting less. Because what it means in the universities is exactly as, I've forgotten your name from ANU just said, your classes will be cut, your courses will be cut. What's happening at the moment and been happening over the past few years is people are getting less choice in courses, less choices within a course, bigger classes, no classes. Students are constantly telling me about how they're supposed to form peer groups to assess their work. You can do that at home. I always thought, when I went to university, I actually thought the people that are going to teach me actually might know a bit more than me. That was the point of going. You were meant to share the knowledge. That's what I always thought as a teacher and an academic. But no, what do we get now? People who've done years of that study, got PhDs, and now what do? Tutor for a few hours a week during the teaching session. And that's all they get paid for. What do they actually do? They put in many, many more hours because they care about their students, they care about their discipline, and they care about education, and they would think that if they do a good enough job of that, they'd get a job, and that's what the universities rely upon. So not only have we got 70% of classes now taught by casuals, that means highly educated people employed for a few hours, but we also have the people who work in student support, the people who work in a whole range of the administrative roles, the people who work in the international offices are mainly employed on short-term contracts, part-time, and again, put in endless hours over what they're paid or recognised for. Every time someone leaves, they're not replaced or they're casualised. So again, people do that because they care about their colleagues, about the students, about making the whole thing work because they think higher education matters. This lot don't. So we have a system running on free labour. You can't run a higher education system like anything else on free labour forever. We will reach a point, and we're getting far too close, where things will start to tumble. Someone mentioned, a woman from SCA not being able to do particular subjects, particular majors. We've got an attack on knowledge in this country. What's now closing down in our universities is whole disciplines. What they do is they wind down the staffing, and then they say, oh, you haven't got that many students. Well, that's because we can't offer that many classes because we haven't got anybody to teach them. Oh, well, we might as well just wipe out history. You wouldn't want to learn history or politics, would you? You might learn something. So when we talk about this, it's about an attack on students, on the next generation. It's an attack on that next generation who want to work in universities and research. It's an attack on those working in universities. It's an attack on the whole community who actually thinks that universities are public institutions that work for in the public interest for the public good. That's what we think universities are for. That's what those that cut universities and try and price them out of ordinary people being able to go to university, they don't think universities should be doing that. They think universities should just be elite establishments for their mates to get qualified in their professions to keep the system as it is. We think all of you people here's children should be going to university if that's what they want to do. They've got to get a decent school education, also in trouble, so that they can make that choice, go into TAFE, go into higher education, make something of their lives, not have the doom which I remember my dad on his deathbed was saying, I can't believe the next generation's going to be worse off. And that's a shameful, shameful thing. But we will fight it. We did defeat deregulation, and to defeat deregulation we had the whole union movement with us. Yeah. And we had the community with us. And this will happen again, because as I've walked just around today, around here, people have been saying, this is outrageous. Ordinary people should be allowed to go to university and expect their kids should. It's as it should be. We want to stop this, and we want to reverse the universities becoming more and more neoliberal, more and more restrictive in what they're teaching and what they're researching. We want proper, decent jobs in university and proper levels of funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeannie. Next up, we have Sophie, who is the president of the National Union of Students.
The National Union of Students have been at the forefront of fighting attacks on higher education for 30 years. In 2014, this very government got incredibly close to gutting our education system in Australia. They wanted students to pay $100,000 to get a degree. They wanted a US-style education system where only the very rich could get a degree. The NUS and the NTU took to the streets in tens of thousands, and we defeated the government's plans. But unfortunately, this government hasn't learned. They've come back after 3 years of planning, and their solution is to cut education funding, $2.8 billion. This government has an agenda against young people, to rip opportunities from us, to gut our education system, to push us into casualised and uncertain workforces. It has never been a tougher time to be a student. Most of us live paycheck to paycheck. The cost of living, trying to pay rent and food is exorbitant, and our social security is failing. Unfortunately, we already know what this budget means for students and for young people. This is the first generation that's going to be priced out of the housing market. The unemployment at the moment is incredibly concerning, and the cost of living is going up and up. But instead of investing in our futures, the government has decided to push a bigger burden onto students, to give the corporate businesses a $50 billion tax break. Australia needs a government that will invest in social support to lift people up rather than push them further below the poverty line. We need to look at countries that have exceptional education systems, countries like Germany, where they have free tuition fees. We need a government that invests in young people's futures to ensure that they have the opportunities afforded to generations before us. We will continue to fight until students are heard, until young people get the opportunities that they deserve. On May 17, the National Union of Students, the NTU, unions, community groups all across Australia will be marching on streets in major cities, and will be fighting back.
Thanks, Sophie. We have Senator Lee Rhiannon, who will be joining us shortly. She just is leaving the building currently, and she can't leave because of division. So what we're thinking of doing is opening up the mic. So if any students here want to come say a few words, or if any of our union comrades want to come say a few words, or even Rachel from the NTU, then yeah, let's go.
Thanks, Marley. I'm Rachel Bale. I'm the ACT Division Secretary for the National Tertiary Education Union. I acknowledge we meet on Aboriginal land today and pay my respects to Elders past and present. You know, a few weeks ago in this country we had a discussion about values. What are our values as Australians? Well, I'll tell you what Australians value. They value education. They value education and they believe we should invest in it. And this government has shown time and time and time again that it doesn't value education. My comrades here have told you, and you know that over the last 3 years, in 2014 they tried the 100k degrees. Well, the National Union of Students and the National Tertiary Education Union and our comrades across the union sector worked together to defeat that, and defeat it we did. Now, last year when the government went to the election, they had no policy on higher education. So don't think we voted for these changes, because we didn't. We didn't vote for these changes and we never will. In the ACT, you might be forgiven for thinking that we live a fairly privileged life. You might be forgiven for thinking that students at the ANU, well, they're pretty cushy, you know, it's a GO8 university. But higher education in the ACT is not the realm of the privileged few, and nor should it be. Nor should it be anywhere in this country. At the ANU, we heard Marley say she comes from a low SES background. She's not the only one. In Canberra, we have the ANU and the University of Canberra, an Australian Catholic University, an Australian Defence Force Academy. We represent the staff there and the students who study courses like teaching. We're talking about students training to be teachers, and we want them to pay more to be a teacher. We're talking about students who are studying to be nurses, who are studying to be aged care workers, and we want them to pay more. Then this government wants to cut funding from their universities. They not only want those teachers, those nurses to pay more, but they want them to get less when they actually go to university. This government is banking on, as Jeannie said, the free labour that staff provide at universities because they care. They care about their students' education. The casual staff who are paid for the few hours that they teach, who stay on, who spend time speaking to students, who work hard and who don't get adequate remuneration for it. It's appalling, and we won't stand for it. Our colleagues who talked about the National Day of Action, the 17th of May, next Wednesday, we urge you to attend your local rally here in Canberra. It'll be at ANU at lunchtime. Some of my colleagues here, I'm sure Robin and others, will be speaking there. I know I'll be there, and I urge all of you to come along. We won't stand for these cuts. We know that education is an investment. We know that this government looks at it and looks at the budget line and looks at the debt. Well, there's an easy way to get rid of that debt, and that is make higher education free again.
Yay! No ifs, no buts, no university cuts. No ifs, no buts, no university cuts. No ifs.
Just quickly, I wanted to let everyone know, as we can see, we don't have much media here. Media is locked up at the moment. It's no surprise that student media has been locked out of the budget lockup. Shame, yes, shame indeed. So, you know, obviously we know that the government doesn't want student media in there reporting on these, you know, horrific cuts and fee hikes to university students. So shame on them for that. Shame on them for Moroni and Honi Soit and all the other student media outlets who are, you know, just as professional, just as qualified to be in the budget lockup, not being allowed in. So yeah, I think John wanted to say a few words. So we'll listen to John, then we'll open up the mic until Lee arrives.
Thanks. My name is John, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. Despite appearances, I'm actually a student at ANU. And although I won't be impacted by the changes, I am expressing my solidarity with the students who are fighting for a better world and for free education. It's been a long fight, and it will continue to be a fight against the forces of reaction like the Turnbull government to drive back their attacks on students. But it's not just students who are under attack. It's also the workers on the campuses who are under attack, which is why I just wanted I'm prompted by something that Jeannie said, which was that basically universities operate on free labour, and they do. The figures show that on average for lecturers they work about 51 hours a week. They're only paid for 37.5 hours a week. So they're working 13 hours a week, extra, unpaid, to keep the university ticking over. We also heard discussions about priorities, and because my background is tax, I always think about what priorities governments have. What is the target of these attacks on universities? Well, it's the staff through things like the slashing of $2.8 billion, and students, obviously. It's staff through the cuts to the introduction of what's called an efficiency dividend, which I had to deal with when I was in the tax office, which basically means you have to do more with less. So you have to work more than 13 hours unpaid for the government, presumably. And I thought, well, 13 hours a week, maybe it's about time that staff stopped working for free for universities and put some real pressure on the universities and said, we'll just do 37.5 hours a week. Which leads me on to my final point. The comrade from Quebec pointed out the 7-month strike and then the 3-month strike. And I think eventually that's what we as university students and university staff have to be considering. I'm a member of both the NTU and also the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance Union. Fairfax workers are under attack, same sort of ideas that they're under attack for. They're under attack because the question of profitability. And of course, universities are under attack because the model that Malcolm Turnbull and others have in mind is a profitable university. Not one that educates people, but one that churns people through as sausage in a sausage factory of learning, and that forces them to pay more and more fees, so that over time we will reach $100,000 fees. We will reach, in the short period of time, $75,000 fees for medicine and other degrees. So I want to finish off by saying that I see the Quebec pattern and what happened in Quebec, the unity of students and staff, as the way forward, that we've got to keep struggling, got to keep fighting, and got to think about how we can beat this government. And Quebec shows us one way of doing that. Thank you.
We'll never be defeated. Thanks, John. Next up, we have Abby, who is the Women's Officer of the National Union of Students. And then we'll also have Cameron, who's the Social Officer at ANU.
Hello, my name's Abby. I'm the Women's Officer for the National Union of Students. I think it's become really obvious in the past few weeks that the Liberal government have an anti-woman agenda and an anti-woman budget. Lowering the tax-free payment threshold to $42,000, down from $56,000, will have a severe and disproportionate effect on women. It is a known fact that women across their lifetime will earn less than men, and this will only ensure that more women are paying back that debt earlier. Shame on the Liberals. Shame! When the Liberals make cuts to higher education, when they make cuts to welfare, when they make cuts to health, all they are doing is screwing over women. Women will wear the burden the worst. When this happens, when cuts to education are made, universities come in and make cuts to student services and take more staff away from student organisations. This means less student support services for very vulnerable women, vulnerable students, vulnerable victims of assault and harassment and rape on campus. The first services that go are services like health and pathology, emergency housing, counselling. It's just horrendous what the Liberals want to do to women. And we need to fight back. We need to fight back on May 17th in every capital city. We are having a national protest. I hope to see you all there.
Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to say this is my first speech at a protest, so forgive me if I'm a bit incoherent. I would like to reflect on what it took me to come to uni and to move away from home to come to uni. So I'm originally from Newcastle, so up north above Sydney. I love Newcastle. And when I was leaving school, myself and the other people that went to my public school, there was these conversations about which uni we were going to go to, which unis we were excited to move to, what our opportunities were going to be as we grew up. and you had a portion of that class that were really certain they were going to move to Sydney, they were going to move to Melbourne, and those students were students that had that money. There was no barrier to uni for them because they could afford it. And there was a group of students that uni wasn't even a possibility. They'd grown up in really terrible circumstances. They'd had to come across lots of barriers, and those students didn't have any hope. And then there was people in the middle, sort of like me. I was just applying for scholarships like at night. I was studying as hard as I possibly could to try and get academic scholarships. I was just trying to do everything I could do to give myself as many opportunities as I could. And I was very, very lucky, and I acknowledge that I was lucky. It was a coincidence. It was something of fate, but it wasn't something that I was entitled to, and it wasn't something that was inevitable. And what I realize is that I have this opportunity, but so many people don't. And that's because there are so many barriers to higher education. There are so many things that stop people from moving away. Sure, there's things like uncertainty moving away from home, or I'm going to have to cook for myself. That is a very real fear. But I think the biggest thing is that uncertainty, that pang you get when you don't know if you actually have enough money to do the things that you want to do. That's a really tough a really tough twist in the gut that you feel when you actually don't know if you can't do the leisurely things you need to be mindful. You can't have a nice meal because you have to defer to something else. So I think that the thing that really disappoints me about this budget is that it's not breaking down barriers to access, it's actually just erecting higher walls. And in a world where walls have become this rhetoric and something that people have come to accept, I just think that it's really, really disappointing. There's so many students in my class that had so many great, fantastic, incredible, wonderful qualities and probably ideas that could have come to fruition if they had the opportunity to access an education. And for all those people, I feel a sense of loss, and that group of people is just going to keep growing if we keep putting up barriers. So I say to the Liberal government, why don't you think about all those kids in the classroom that are never going to get the opportunity to have a microphone held up to voice their ideas, because that's what university gives you. It gives you a megaphone to project your ideas into the world, and we need to give people opportunities to do that.
Fantastic. Lots of great speeches here today. We're going to also hear from the Maritime Union of Australia, Joe Deakin, where there's a bunch of us here from Sydney, and at every rally you have the Maritime Union of Australia backing you. The Sydney College of the Arts campaign, it was the MUA who came in day 3 and supported us to the hilt. The Indigenous struggles, Redfern Tent Embassy, it was the Maritime Union of Australia that came in and supported that struggle to the hilt. So we're really very proud to have Joe Deakin here supporting the students, and we're here to support also the MUA-led Jobs Embassy. So thanks very much. Give it up, Joe.
Thank you, Rachel. Listen, like everyone else, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that always was and always will be Aboriginal land. You know, from the Maritime Union's perspective, and I'm sure other unions, we really take our hat off to you young people. We congratulate you for what you're doing, because the trade union movement's struggle and the struggle of university students and students as a whole, it's all interwoven. It's all relevant. If kids are not given the opportunity to educate themselves and advance themselves, we'll end up with a country of numbskulls, like up here. What these people are doing by putting these exorbitant fees on these kids, it's bastardry. What it's all about is this, is making sure that these kids that basically come from working class stock are not given the chance to educate and to lead this country. By putting the fees up and up and up, it makes it impossible for these young people to match strides with it. But that's all done cynically and for a purpose. That's to dumb down any idea that the working class can get himself into a position of education. So the elite, the ones that can afford these fees, they get the queue to the top universities or indeed to universities. and they dumb down working kids. They dumb down these kids, these future leaders of this country. And they're doing it because these kids are progressive. These kids are willing to stare these people down and say, we're not going to cop it. We're prepared to sit in. We're not going to cop your bastardising us. We want education, and we're demanding it. And every trade union is here today, and in the future, and communities need to stand by these brave, heroic kids and stand up to these parasites up the hill and tell them in no uncertain terms that get your hands off these students. They're entitled to get educated because these kids, when they get educated, they're going to educate the kids coming on. So all power to these young students. You have shown the way. Thank you very much. Keep that fight up. And remember, our union and the trade union movement is with you all the way. Thank you.
Look, I wanted to say a few words for someone who couldn't be here today, and that's Dhaval, and he's an international student from India. He's our international student officer. And I think that we have to acknowledge this budget, this latest round of attacks is against domestic students first and foremost. But just a few weeks prior, we saw an attack against international students with the 457 visa changes. And we also have to acknowledge that the federal government funding cuts to educational institutions, to universities, has been supplanted by international students and the money that they bring to universities. They are super exploited at companies like 7-Eleven. They can only work 20 hours extra, and if they're found out by the Department of Immigration, then they can be deported, of which some of us have seen international students in detention centres and have fought for their release. So we see this on university campuses, and we have to acknowledge the fight that these international students need to wage, and it is very difficult for them to wage that fight when you have the Department of Immigration deporting students, as many as 20,000 a year. There was one report which indicated that it might be as great as that. So the Australian government makes a lot of money out of international students. We want to extend our solidarity to this sector, this growing sector of people in our educational institutions, and say we do not forget you. We don't want to speak on your behalf, but we are with you. So let's not forget the international student fight. Thanks very much. Just one last thing too. Whatever political party brings down attacks, we will fight them. Because actually we had free education in this country and it was taken away from us. We fought that in the 80s. We wanted free education to remain in the 90s, but we weren't able to win that fight. Whatever political party brings down the attacks, students will rise up and defend our education. Rise up like they did in Germany, rise up like they did in Quebec, in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Ecuador, where they have won free education. We will rise regardless of the political parties that bring down these attacks. So we're going to hear from Lee Rhiannon, who is out of the horror chamber of Parliament and into the streets. Is she here? She is.
She's still coming.
And yeah, and also to the political parties that support free education, of course, thank you. Woo!
G'day everyone, my name's Harry Needham. I'm a student at the ANU. I wasn't planning on speaking today, but I've just read something in the news that I think deserves to be highlighted. As I'm sure all of us are aware, many students around Australia rely on Centrelink to get by every day. We've seen in recent months, we know about the exorbitant waiting times, how ridiculous it is to get onto Centrelink, the bureaucratic hoops you have to leap through. We've heard about the people being hounded for fake debt created by automated response systems. But now it seems that in this budget, Scott Morrison is going to introduce a demerit system for Centrelink. So you're going to have a set number of points, and you'll lose those points if you miss a job interview, if you don't turn up to a work for the dole meeting. And once you've lost all your points, you're cut off from welfare for 4 weeks. 4 weeks without Centrelink. 4 weeks, that's the difference between being able to eat and going hungry. That's the difference between having a roof over your head and sleeping rough. And I think it's telling that these are called demerit points because you have demerit points on your driver's license. And how do you lose demerit points? You lose them by committing a criminal offence. And I think this tells us all we need to know about how this government views students and views the most vulnerable in this society. It views them not as people to be helped, but as criminals to be punished. And I think that that is bastardry, it's bullshit, and it has to be fought. Thank you.
I've just texted Lee. She's on her way. It's okay. So if anyone else wants to come up to the mic and say a few words, you're more than welcome to. I'm sure there's lots of angry students here. Feel free. Yeah, no ifs, no buts, no education cuts.
No ifs, no buts, no education cuts. No ifs, no buts, no education cuts. No ifs, no buts, no education cuts. No ifs, no buts, no education cuts. No ifs, no buts, no education cuts. No ifs, no buts, no corporate universities, no cuts. No fees, no corporate universities, no cuts. No fees, no corporate universities, no cuts. No fees, no corporate universities, no cuts.
No fees, no corporate universities.
Okay, and so just to reiterate and finish off, we are organising great forces for May 17, and we invite the unions to come along, young, old, take half a day off work if you've got any sick pay left, and come join students and young people on the streets. May 17 across the country, we're going to make every capital city sing with our chants and find out more from us about how you can assist. We do need community organising around this fight. It's not just staff and students. A lot of the staff, a third who are casual at Sydney University, find it very difficult to take time off to go to rallies. They've got lots of marking. They're worried about the ramifications if they do. So it's really important that the community comes on side, and certainly that's the lessons of the Quebec struggle as well. It's the parents, it's the community. So all unions, we're calling on you to come out on May 17 and support. If you haven't endorsed, if your organisation hasn't endorsed this important rally, please talk to one of us here and we'll get you on the list. The greater the number, the greater the force we will be. So dare to struggle, dare to win. If we don't fight, we lose. And we want to win this one. Maybe they're not going to get it through the Senate. Maybe the crossbenchers are going to see us on the streets and get worried. That's what we want. We want a groundswell of organised resistance, and we're gonna give it to them. So thanks very much. Is Lee here, or shall we sing some more chants?
Yeah, sing some more chants. Lee's leaving question time. Yeah. She's coming.
I'm pretending I'm in Parliament and sort of filibustering for Lee. Just picking up what Rachel's just saying about the votes in Parliament, I think one of the things that people get a little deceived by is the notion that it's all about just trying to get enough votes of the Senate to vote it down like we did with the deregulation and privatisation package. Let me tell you, and Paul was there too and others were, getting those votes was because people had mobilised and were on the streets and in their communities. There's no lobbying, only rich people lobby and get their way. Ordinary people actually have to say, hey, we do vote and we do organise. And so the only way we defeat this is if they have no choice but to look at people just aren't going to put up with it. That's what it's about.
What do we want? Free education. When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free education.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free education.
When do we want it?
Now.
And how are we going to get it?
Fight for it.
How are we going to get it?
Fight for it.
How are we going to get it?
Fight for it.
How are we going to get it?
Fight for it.
Birmingham, get out! Birmingham, get out!
We know what you're all about. Cuts, job losses, money for the bosses.
That the student movement used. So obviously we took to the streets and we also engaged in civil disobedience. And that was a really, really important part of their campaign to, send a really strong message to the government that students are angry and that they're not going to take these cuts. So I'm not sure if anyone here was involved, but back in 2014, I think, a bunch of students crashed Q&A when Education Minister Christopher Pyne was speaking. And yeah, they stopped the broadcast. And that was really an important way to show the government and also, the wider community in Australia that we're not going to take these cuts. And that's why we did the same thing only a week or so ago. So I was part of the group of students that was at the National Press Club during Simon Birmingham's address. And that's why we chanted no cuts, no fees, no corporate universities, because we don't believe in those things. We don't believe in the corporatisation of our universities, and we're willing to crash these events. And our message to Simon Birmingham and the government is that at every event and every speech that they hold, every Liberal MP that enters any of our campuses, we will be there to send them the message that we will not let these cuts go ahead and that we will continue fighting until our education is free again. So yeah.
Ongoing contribution to our community. Really excellent to see you here today, that we really have to knock off another really rotten piece of legislation that is targeting students. I mean, there is so many ways that this government can raise money, and what do they do when it comes to education, when it comes to public education? Load it up onto students, rip money out of universities, make it tougher for the staff to do their job. So it really is really fantastic to see you here today. This legislation has not gone through. We defeated it back in 2014 and we can do it again. And that's what's absolutely critical. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves that so many of us, I'm one of them, are the people who will be voting on this legislation. I know it's been said many times, but it needs to be repeated. We benefited from free education. And more countries around the world are doing that. And why do they do it? I think many of them do it for the good reasons, that everybody should have the opportunities to have the education. But also, from what I read about Germany, they do it because they see the benefits, the economic benefits that come from it. There's huge opportunities here to really develop our education in ways that will just change people's lives. I was the first in my family to have the opportunity to go to university, appreciate it enormously. And when I listen to my friends and my kids, I hear them talking so differently from when I was at school. When I was at school, I was at that generation. It wasn't if you're going to go to university, it was what you would do at university. Whereas so many of my kids' friends, university's off the agenda for them. And it really is because of the money. It's really because of what these people are doing. And imagine coming up with increasing the amount of money that you'll pay for fees. And we know once that comes in, it'll get higher and higher, and those $100,000 degrees or more become the reality. That should be frank about the chance of Labor overturning that is minimal. One of the disappointing aspects is Labor's really strong in opposition, but too often once the bad laws are in, it's really hard to get that momentum to change. So the fees go up, and then I think it's 42,000 that they're lowering it to. I mean, that will turn so many people off. So fantastic to be here with you today. And I did just want to add the issue about money, how it could be done. Like, you shouldn't have to come at Parliament and have the protest. A decent government would be putting in place revenue measures that tax the companies. Like, remember what we did when the last time Parliament sat? We gave the companies a free handout. In terms of reducing their tax from 30% to 25%. And what do we then find out? There's 100 Australian companies that have never paid, in the last few years, have not paid any tax to the tax office. Shame. Absolutely shame. And then if they stop giving the subsidies to the big polluting companies, we will get about $38 billion over the next 10 years. There are so many ways that this government could raise money that would make it a fairer society. One way to address inequality is by having a fairer tax system. Another way to address inequality is to having free education. So excellent to be here with you today. It really does make a difference. Your protests really help drive good change in there. So good to be with you. Thanks very much.